Hey, so this is my very first time doing a Substack Live. So this is really interesting. I'm excited to do this and wanted to just kind of talk to you guys to get to know you and you get to know me. And so um, I had a couple of things I wanted to talk about. So let me just put this in the chat. Maybe that will help. Okay. So I wanted to talk about it's not about who you know. So just to give you a little bit of background about me. So my name is Seneca Dunmore. I am the founder and CEO of Dunmore Capital Ventures, which is a capital advisory firm that connects founders with funders. So I started that business in response to the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. There were a lot of people of color leaving corporate spaces and now wanting to try their hand at entrepreneurship. And what they kept on running into was um, barriers when it came to access to capital, right? And so I had the bright idea. I had this unction from the Lord to help those individuals to access the capital they needed to grow and scale their businesses. And just to give you some context, I don't have a degree in finance. I didn't come from an investment or funding background. I really didn't even come from an entrepreneurial background. Both my parents were very hard workers. My mom taught for 30 plus years. My dad retired from the VA hospital. He's a veteran himself, a veteran of the Army. And so I grew up in a very marginalized and economically disenfranchised community called Sunnyside on the southeast side of Houston, Texas. And it wasn't until I left Sunnyside, got a scholarship to Tuskegee University, and went to college in Alabama that I realized that Sunnyside was not a bad neighborhood, right? For all intents and purposes, we labeled it as a bad neighborhood because there was a lot of crime, a lot of violence. And what I realized is that it wasn't a bad neighborhood. It was a very marginalized and economically disenfranchised community. And so the violence, the crime and the things that we were seeing in that community was not a result of bad people. It was just a result of people in survival mode. And so when you're in survival mode, the only thing you can think about is surviving, right? So if you remember anything about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That pyramid growing up, I'm sure you were probably taught that maybe in middle school, high school. And at the very base level are those physiological needs, food, water, shelter. And, at the very top of the pyramid is self actualization, right? Coming into yourself, everything, all your needs being met, and you being able to fulfill your God given purpose. And so I tell people, in my community, you couldn't even think about self actualization because you were at the base of the pyramid, right? You were just trying to figure out if your lights were going to be on the next day. You were hoping that nobody was coming and putting an eviction notice on your door. You were trying to make sure that you could feed your children, right? So there were some things we weren't able to meet those basic physiological needs. And so we couldn't even think about comfort and safety and self actualization and all those things as you elevate through the pyramid. And so here's what I've learned as I've gotten into business as a full time entrepreneur. I started my business in, in May of 2015. So I left corporate. I come from a corporate background. Um, I um, got my bachelor's of science in biology, got my master's in information technology. I worked in tech for about 10 years before leaving in October of 2014, starting my own business in May of 2015. And then by 2016, I was an international speaker, right? I did my first international speaking engagement in Darling, South Africa, which is about 45 minutes outside of Cape Town. And um, again, during the pandemic, I saw that there was individuals who looked like me who were struggling to access that capital. And it really came down to um, a lack of resourcefulness, right? And not knowing where the resources were, right? So again, if you've grown up in neighborhoods like me, you didn't have access to a lot of resources, and that was the one of the biggest problems. So you didn't even know where to look to find those resources. And that's what I was noticing with a lot of the individuals who were leaving corporate America during the pandemic and starting their own businesses. And a lot of those were Black women, right? Black women are, you know, one of the most educated demographics in the United States. And we start businesses at a lot quicker rate than most other demographics. And so I wanted to help those women and men, right? It wasn't just about the women, it was about men and women and anyone who was starting a business and lacked the information to obtain those resources. So, one of the ways I did that was through my Access Granted conference. My Access Granted conference was designed to equip small business owners and entrepreneurs, mostly in historically marginalized and economically disenfranchised communities, with number one, the financial education that they needed, because if you were like me, I didn't take any courses towards financial literacy, right? That just was not a thing. Number two, capacity building, making sure that we can build their capacity for funding, making sure their financials are in order, profit and loss statements, balance sheets, tax returns, that type of thing. And then the last thing, last but certainly not least, and probably one of the most important pieces was giving them access to the funding resources by way of putting them in front of the funders and the investors. So I spent a lot of my time traveling, meeting with investors, meeting with funders, meeting with a lot of the top banks to understand what their investment criteria was, what their funding criteria was, and how I can get them in front of my audiences. And so that's what Access Granted was all about. It was bringing those individuals to the stage. So now people could ask them questions, and then they could cultivate the relationship with those individuals. So when it was all said and done, they knew exactly who they could turn to go get a line of credit or a small business loan or investment. And it's been a beautiful journey. I have done 6 Access Granted conferences since 2022. And we will be doing our 7th this April here in Houston. So I'm really excited about that. And but yeah, I wanted to tell you guys that it's not about just who you know, but who knows you. Okay. And let me tell you what I mean by that. When you think about it, like we all know Mark Zuckerberg, right? But how many of us does Mark Zuckerberg know? But he clearly has the resources that most of us could use and possibly need. And so I really started to learn that as I started to build the business, because I didn't realize how important and so how powerful relationships were. And again, I've always had great relationships. I have a great relationship with my mother and father. They've been married almost 59 years this May. I have great relationships with my sisters and brothers. I have great friendships, right? I've always had really good relationships. And so, but I didn't realize when it came to the business world that, you know, that was supposed to be the case as well. And so when I started, getting out here and cultivating these relationships, most people assumed, you know, when they saw my credentials, that's how I was getting into these rooms. That's how I was getting all these meetings with these high net worth individuals. And that was far from it, right? And that may have helped. It definitely looked good for me to have a bachelor's and a master's, and they see me, as a doctoral candidate, and they've seen me travel the world. I've been to 55 countries, and I've been able to do some amazing things. I've been able to run my own business, all of that. So all of that does help. Don't get me wrong. Um, but it wasn't the thing that got me in the door, right? What got me into the door was I was fierce about cultivating these relationships. And you know how they say follow up is the fortune is in the follow up, and it really is, because if I didn't hear from someone the first or second or third time I tried to get in touch with them, I didn't give up, right? And so most people think, oh, I don't want to bother them. I don't want to seem like I'm thirsty. And I'm like, no, especially when it comes to the investors, I'm like, investors want to invest, right? Their money sitting does nothing for them. If you're not moving the money, you're not making the money. Okay. And that's why they call it currency, right? Because it's supposed to flow. And if you look at the Bible, right, the Bible has so many principles that talks about that, currency money is meant to flow. It's meant to be exchanged. It's meant to be used because it's a tool. And so, as I clearly started cultivating these relationships, I started being invited to these invitation only closed door spaces with these high net worth individuals. And what I noticed is that they clearly trusted me, right? And I'm pretty sure you probably heard this before, but people like to do business with people that they know, like, and trust. And that's very true, right? Because again, at that level, there's very little room for error, right? The margin of error is very small. So you have to be a person of integrity. You have to be a person of your word. And they have to trust you. And if not, they're not inviting you into those rooms. And so this is what I've had to understand over the last 2 years is that um they don't just invite anybody into those rooms, right? They got to know, like, and trust you. And most people think the information that you get in those rooms that you can just Google it. It's on YouTube University, and trust and believe when I tell you this, it's not. Um, I remember my friend Adonis Lockett, who's also an investor, one of the investors that I work with. He invited me to a masterclass in 2024. It was called the Money Is Masterclass. And when I tell you guys, I was mind blown by the information that I learned in this masterclass. Number one, it was like there were three ways, three tiers to get in that masterclass. The lowest ticket was like $17,000, and the top ticket was like $49,000. And I got in free because he personally invited me. He was one of the speakers himself. And when I tell you what I learned in that masterclass blew my mind because probably 90% of the information that was discussed, I had never heard of before. And here it is. I like to think I'm a very educated woman, right? Like I said, I've been to over 50 countries, and I have a bachelor's and a master's, and I'm all but dissertation right now, finishing my doctorate. So I've been around some amazing people. And so I thought, I knew a lot when it came to money and building wealth. And I had my knowledge was 2% compared to, what I thought I knew. And so when I was in that room, it was amazing because the information that was shared, the knowledge that I was able to obtain, it just blew my mind. And that's when I realized, like, wow, high net worth individuals only share this information within closed door invitation only spaces. You've got to be invited into the room, or you've got to invest in that room, right? You've got to be invited into the room by someone who's already in the room, right? Or you've got to be invested in the room, meaning you could pay that $17,000 ticket at $49,000 admissions. And that made all the difference. So is that really shifted the paradigm of my thinking moving forward, because now I focus less on, getting more education and doing all these things for pomp and circumstance and for show. I focus more on cultivating and taking time to build those relationships, making as many, deposits into those relationships as I possibly can, so that when I'm looking for a withdrawal, right, it's an easy yes, because this is someone that I've constantly been pouring into. And so that's what you have to do, right? You've got to keep pouring into these relationships, and then eventually it pays off. It really does. Um, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful. And so that's why I love the work that I do at Dunmore Capital Ventures, and we want to do more. I got into the insurance business as well because I realized that um, a lot of these high net worth individuals, they were building their wealth and securing their wealth within insurance, right? Having these insurance policies and cash value policies, and then they would have trust. And so the trust would own the insurance policy and, be the beneficiary. It goes deep. It goes deep. And again, I didn't learn this information until I got in these rooms, until I got around these high net worth individuals, because they don't teach you this stuff in school. This stuff is not on YouTube. This stuff is not on Google. This stuff is not in a book. And trust me, if it was in a book, I would have found it by now, because I've read every business book, every economics book, right? I am a book connoisseur. I am a reading junkie. Okay, I read every day, all day. Um, I don't think I've owned a TV since college, and I've been out of college 23 years, 23 years, and I don't think I've owned a TV since college. But anyway, guys, I just wanted to share that with you that it's not about just what you know or who you know, but it's about who knows you. So in 2026, I would encourage you to spend more time cultivating those relationships. Find the people who you want to be connected to, right? Reach out to them, cultivate those relationships, make warm introductions or ask for warm introductions. Um, Go in the spaces they are, right? Whether that's at the gym, the golf course, nice hotels, right? Nice restaurants. Go start putting yourself in those environments. And like I said, just start introducing yourself and letting them know they're most of them are very nice people. Um, and what I found is that most of them don't mind helping. They don't mind, being of service to you. You just have to ask. You just have to ask and be serious about your acts because the last thing you want to do is start that relationship and then not, continue to cultivate it. Okay. Anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about today. Thank you guys. This was my very first live on Substack, and I hope I did well. And this will be the first of many. I hope you guys have a fabulous Tuesday. Bye.